Hey everyone, this is Sandeep and welcome back to Learn React in 10 Days course. So this is a series which is like an in-depth course in React which I have started, and today is a day 3. I'm really happy that I have finished day 1 and day 2 and now we are into day 3. Okay, so let's get started, and in day 3 what are we going to learn? So in day 3 I'm going to cover two different topics. Initially, I've decided to separate these topics into two different videos, but later on, thought to combine these topics together because they go hand in hand. So today we are going to learn about classes and state. So let's get started. I'm going to quickly tell you what I'm going to cover in this video. So first of all, I'm going to what are we going to make in this video? So I'm going to make a really simple widget actually. It's an application, but a widget. So what we are going to make together is this simple digital clock. What you see here. Yes, the clicking digital talk. That's what we are going to make in this video. Let me quickly cover the agenda of this video. So while making this app, we are going to understand class versus functional component. We already discussed, we already learned about functional components in last video, but now we are going to learn another way of creating components in React, and that is using classes. So we'll talk about classes versus functional component. I'm going to touch a bit about classes versus hooks also. So hooks is something new, which has came in React. So I'm going to compare. I'm going to give you the idea. I'm going to do the comparison between classes versus hooks. Bit of knowledge. Then we are going to talk about state. We're going to talk about state rules and constructor function and how you can set state in React. Okay. So I think we have a lot to cover in this video. So we can quickly get started. So let's start with our first topic: classes versus functional component. So we already know what is functional component, right? So we write a function, and that function basically returns a JSX, and we know what is JSX, right? I have covered JSX in first video, day 1. So if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you go and watch that video. I mean the day 1 video and day 2 video, and then you come to day 3 video. But you can watch this video independently also, because one video is going to cover one topic in depth. So I mean, if you want to learn like class and state, then you can watch this video. Okay, functional component returns JSX. JSX is nothing but it's a markup language which React has created, which has strength of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And even that JSX output can be configured using props, right? So like function component doesn't only return the markup, but we can configure that markup by passing some props. Props are like, attributes of a component, right? So this is about functional component. This is how we create functional component in React. Now, today we are going to learn how to create component using class, and we really need classes. That's why I am going to talk about it here. So class component are like similar to functional components. So the first point, they also return JSX, okay? And we can configure that JSX output using props. So they're like 50%, almost similar to functional component. What functional component does, class component also does the same. But they come with two important strengths, or two important new added features called, the first one is state system and second one is lifecycle method. Now I know this is for the first time. If you're hearing about state system and lifecycle method, it might be overwhelming for you. I mean, what is this? I didn't hear about it. Don't worry, we are going to discuss about state, system, and lifecycle method. So state I'm going to cover in this video, and lifecycle method we are going to cover in the next video. So you understood, right? So just for your knowledge right now, like as we are moving into the video, you will understand more. Functional component return JSX. JSX output can be configured with props. Similarly, we can do similar thing using class components also. They can also return JSX, and that output can be configured with props. But they have these two more important things: state, system, and lifecycle method. And I just give you a high level idea about state. Just, just to touch the surface, tip of the iceberg, I can say. So functional component and class component are how they are different. So functional component, you can think like they're like dummy thing. I mean, think like a dummy, like dummy person or a doll, dummy doll, which has like beautiful color, beautiful hairs, and beautiful face. But that doll is a dummy doll, right? It doesn't do anything. I mean, it doesn't do anything. But class components are nothing like a real person, right? They're also like they have a color, they have eyes, and they have all those properties, right? Like if I want to define like what are the attributes of a person, right? So a person has eyes, cheeks, nose, right? But a dummy person is going to have all those attributes, but dummy person cannot act. But a class component, so we can say that is a functional component, but a class component is like a real person, so it has all those colors, eyes, nose, and everything. But a real person, a class component can do things. So he can walk, right? He can laugh, he has all those emotions. So you can think like class component has all those emotions. So that could be one of the example I can give you. I can give you one more example. Think like, you have a tape recorder. So like if you go back to old days, maybe, or nowadays also, we have a tape recorder with all the preloaded songs. So say suppose you got a recorder which has 500 songs pre-built into it. So you can only play those 500 songs. You can't go beyond that, right? So it's like a dummy uh, music player. And if I compare it with, I have Alexa here. So if I compare with Alexa, so Alexa is like a smart device, right? So I can ask Alexa to play any song. I can ask different questions. So this is one of the comparison where a tape recorder is like a dummy or a functional component, and Alexa is like a real, though it is not real, and a dynamic and a dynamic person which can play so many songs for me. So this is just a quick comparison I want to give you between functional component and class component. Okay, so moving on. I know I'm covering a bit theory about it. Now there is something called hooks which has been introduced in React. I mean, not recently actually. It's been a year or two, I can say. So what are the differences between classes and hooks? That's what I want to cover. Then definitely we are going to move into practical things. So we know like class component returns JSX. JSX output can be configured using props. It has state, system, and lifecycle method. So these two things which functional component doesn't have, we get it in the class component. Now what React team does, they, like we know functional components are good, easy to write. They return JSX, they return the JSX output which can be configured using props. They added these two features, this state, system, and lifecycle methods, into hooks, into functional components, and they named them as hooks. So you can think, when someone asks you, what is the difference between classes and hooks, you can give this simple, just keep this image in your mind, and you can give this simple example, or simple answer to that. So hooks are nothing but functional component with the features, with these two added features of class component, the state, system, and the lifecycle methods. So functional component plus hooks is nothing but functional component has the potential of returning JSX. JSX output can be configured using props. by adding hooks into it, and hooks is something different. Okay, but this, we plug them into the functional component, but hooks itself is a system which has like this state system and lifecycle methods. So obviously, why you should learn class components then? That's a question which might be coming into your mind. And trust me, you should learn class components. That's why I'm making this a React series where where I'm covering the class component. So there are a couple of reasons I can give you. So there are organization, they're still using class components in legacy projects. Legacy projects means the projects which are already the projects which already exist in the market, right? And they have created all those component in class. So say suppose you join a team, and say suppose you get the opportunity to work in a legacy project, like existing project. It's not a project from scratch. So obviously, if it has been written using classes, so you should know classes, right? You should know how to create class components, right? And the second important point is learning class component first would make hooks easier to learn. Yes, I mean, I highly recommend you learn class component first, because when you learn class component, you understand the state system, you understand the lifecycle methods, and once you have that knowledge of class component with these two important features, learning hooks is like a cakewalk. It will become easy for you. So if you trust me, and if you uh, if you listen to my recommendation, learn class component first and then move on to hooks. That's my suggestion. But see, don't take it this way that, I mean, I'm not stopping you to directly learn the hooks. I mean, if you want to directly learn hooks, you can do that, no problem at all. But learning class component and then moving on to hooks will help you work on old projects which were developed in using class component, and even new project. Obviously, when you're going to start a new project from scratch in React, you're going to write functional component. You're not going to use class component, because we go with the recent features, right? We don't use like old features of a technology. We go with the recent features. So class component to hooks would be a good learning path. And if you prefer that path, I think that will be really good. So this is some theory around functional component and class component, right? And I think we have covered good ground around functional component. We have covered good ground around what is a difference between classes and hooks. I think we should take a small quick break here. Now we have the understanding, right? So I think take a break, go for a walk, and have a quick revision in your mind about it, like what we learn, what are functional component, what are class component, a brief summary about it, like classes and functional component returns JSX. We can configure the JSX using props. Same thing can be done by class components also, with the two new features called state system and lifecycle methods. Okay, so let's take a quick break, come back, and we'll start with our application. Welcome back. So we had a quick break. Now let's continue our journey and let's start creating a digital clock, and let's make it tick. So I'm not like, I have already created a project here. So if you see here, so I have run this command. So I think you already know this command now, because we have ran it a couple of times in last videos, I would say. So let me go back to top. So if you see here, like I have run this command npx create react app, and I have created a classes project. So this is going to create a React project. You can see that my React project has been created. So I'm going to cd into it 03 dash classes, and I'm going to run my project npm start. So this is going to start, and as we know, right, React already gave us this logo, and it's giving us an instruction to go to app.js and start writing your code. So as we already did, so I'm going to go back to my code editor, and I'm going to open this folder, this new project which I have created. So I think I need to go back to which folder. Let me try. Okay, so this one I need to open. And we are going to start from scratch. So I'm going to delete all of these files. And I'm going to start from scratch. So again, I'm going to create my index.js, and here I'm going to import React from React, and I'm going to import React DOM from React DOM, and I'm going to render something here. So I'm going to use React DOM dot render function. And for the timing, let's render something like this, digital clock. So let's render a dummy div, digital clock, and where to render it, right? So I'm going to use document dot get element by ID, and I'm going to target the root. So let's save it. If I go back, okay, cannot find file index.js does not, let me refresh it. Cannot find module React, waiting for the update signal from. So I'm getting this error. Let me see. So index.js, React DOM from React DOM dot render digital clock. Let me try. Okay. React DOM. I think this is not right, probably. This is right. React DOM is right. This React. Okay, sorry. I have to use this React, not the capital one. So let me save. If I go back, see. So the application is running. Now, obviously, like I told you, right, we are going to create a digital clock, a ticking clock. So it's a good idea to start with some of the questions, right? And first, I'm going to create this digital clock using functional component. And then we will convert that functional component into class component. So some of the questions that I think we should ask ourselves while creating this app, like how to get the current time, right? Obviously, a clock is going to show us a time. So how I can get that time in React? So to answer that question, basically, so we can use JavaScript date object for that. So JavaScript has inbuilt a date object, and it has those methods using which we can get the time, hour, second, and everything. And then the next thing, which is like how to make a clock ticking. And for that, we can use JavaScript set interval function so that we can have the clock ticking. So if you want to know more about the date object or set interval, you can just go to Google and you can search like JavaScript, type JavaScript date object. And obviously this first link will help you. Just click on it and you can see like, so JavaScript date object has different methods, which I can show you here. Like it has a method of get time, it has a method of get seconds. So get time returns the numeric value of specified date as a number of milliseconds since January 1, 1970. So probably we can try using this function. Let's see what output this function gives us. So, I can just go to my application here. I can go to console. I can write new date dot get time, something like this. And if you see here that it returns me the milliseconds, I think what it has mentioned here returns the numeric value of specified date as the number of milliseconds since January 1, 1970. Okay, so I think this function is not going to help. So I need hours actually. The first thing which I need is hours, right? So yes, I have the hours function. So let me try using this function here. So I'll go back here and let me try get hours. See that? It's returning me the R value. And similarly, we are going to use get minutes also. So there is a minutes function and this will return me the minutes. So we know like how we can generate that digital clock. So let's start. Let's create our functional component first. So I'm going to go back to my code editor And first of all, I'm going to create app.js, and this is where I'm going to render my digital clock. So, and this app will be rendered into my uh, main index.js file. So this is a standard, our project is going to start, the entry point is index.js. That's where we are going to start our React application. And that index is going to render app. And inside that app, we can have a digital clock, right? So that's the structure I'm following here. I mean, this is a good practice. Just remember it. Try to follow this good practice whenever you're working on any project. Okay. So I'll create apps. This app is nothing but going to be a functional component. So I'm going to import React from React here. And I'm going to create a functional component here, which is app. And this is going to return, for now, I'm just going to return a div with a digital clock. Okay, and let me export it. Export default and app. I'm going to save it, and let's import this app here. Import app from dot slash app, and let's have that app component render here. I'm going to use app. Now if I save, if I go back, it will like similar output, digital clock. Now let's create our digital clock component. So I'm going to create my digital clock. I'm going to start with a functional component, digital clock.js. And like how to create functional component. If you don't know how to create a functional component, please go back and watch my day 2 video where I have covered how to create functional components. So again, I'm going to import React from React, and let's create our digital clock functional component. So this is where, so functional components are nothing but just a normal function in JavaScript where, we pass props. So this is where we pass all those configuration values to configure our JSX as an input. So it's like a functional machine, which takes the input and produces JSX as output. So digital clock, obviously. So let me let me take that dev part. I'm going to have a div which will return a digital clock for now. And I'm going to export this component, default digital clock, save. Now inside my app, I'm going to import digital clock. So I'm following that component hierarchy, right? Index is your entry point, app is your main application, and inside that main application, we are rendering our digital clock. So import digital clock from dot slash digital clock. And instead of rendering this, I'm going to render my digital clock. Okay, let's go back, refresh. Our clock has rendered, but it's not ticking yet, right? So to make our clock ticking, let's go to our digital clock and go back to our questions, right? Which the thought process, which this is a really simple app, but I just want you to get into the habit of asking these questions like, how can I get the current time? So as I've already told you, we can use JavaScript date object for that. So I'm going to use that, and let's take a baby step here. Let's try to first render only the current hour. Okay. And to write JavaScript inside my functional component, how we can do that? We can use curly brackets. And I'm going to say new date. Okay, so I can directly create a date object because I'm writing JavaScript, and then I can call that get hours function, which is going to return me the current hour of my machine, right? So this is how, and if I save this and if I go back to my application, see that? So it's 10 a.m. in the morning. That's what you can see here. Now, somehow we need to achieve this, right? So if I go back to my mockup, Let me go back to my mockup. This is where, so this is the first part we have achieved, right? We are showing the R. Now we need to show that colon mark and then minutes and seconds. So same thing we can do, right? New date dot get hours. Similarly, we have, but I cannot write this colon something like this. So we need to convert this into a template string. Now this is again a JavaScript concept. So in JavaScript, you can write template strings where you can mix like JavaScript within your string. So to write this part now, I need to put it into curly brackets, something like this. So new date dot get hours, then I can put that colon, and I can call another function with something like this, where again I can write a new date dot get minutes. So this is going to return me the minutes, and then again this here, and again I can write this new date dot get seconds. I think this is getting longer. Uh, I'll tell you the best way. I mean, this is not a good way of writing code. So let's refactor this code a bit, because this has become like a long string here, and I need to scroll and show it to you. Let me save it first, and let's go back and see if we are getting the time. See that 10:35:54. So whenever I'm going to refresh, I'm going to get that current time, right? See that? Okay. So how to refactor this code? Okay, so let's refactor this code. So I'm going to create a new variable here, say suppose time, and I'm going to call it new date. So this is going to return me a new current time, right? So time. And let's form that string in a separate variable. So I'm going to say const, and let me call it date actually, or maybe we'll call it time and time string. So inside this time string, now I'm going to write this code, and we'll make it look better. We'll have a proper indentation of the code so that it will be readable. So I'm going to use time dot get hours first, and then probably I can do something like this. So I'm going to press enter here. So this will give me a nice indentation, and I'm going to put semicolon here. You got it? Now I got the hours, then I want this, right? I'm going to put one more enter here, a return key, get minutes, and again a colon, return, and then I can say time dot get seconds. You got it? And now I'm going to use this time string here. So I need that JavaScript literal, because I'm going to write a JavaScript variable here. So time string. Let me remove this, and I'm going to save. And now if I go back, function get seconds, I did something wrong here. Yes, I need to write curly brackets. And if I go back, see that we are getting the current time here. So we have solved our first problem, right? So if I go back to my presentation, we have solved the first problem of our app, how to get the current time. So we have used JavaScript date object, and we have solved our first problem, right? So if I go back to my application, we can see, right, we are showing the hour, we are showing the minutes, we are showing the seconds. And how we did that? We have created a functional component. Obviously, we don't need to configure our digital clock, so I didn't pass any props. This is how we have created. But now, how am I going to click the clock, right? That's the next question I have here, right? How to make the clock ticking. Now, this is where the comparison between props and state is going to come. So as I told you, this clock, think like this clock as a component. This is like entity, right? So prop is something which I call, it's like attribute which we can use to configure to make your component, right? But but to but to sorry, but to make your component work, right, you need something else. Because props, you can make your component work using props also. But to do that, I think to make it better, I think there is something called state. That's where the state comes. Now, this is the problem, right? We are going to solve how we can take this clock. And to solve this problem, I know I cannot do it with props. That time is a property of digital clock. That time, that ticking time, is a responsibility of this digital clock. And right now I'm not able to do it, right? Say suppose now if I try to do this, so let me do this. So this time should change as the clock is ticking. So I'm going to achieve that using set interval method. So I'm going to use set interval here, and I'm going to pass a function here which is like I'm calling this function after every second. Okay. And let me do this here. Maybe I'll declare this const time here, and I need to change it to let, because obviously I'm going to change it. And so instead of, so initially I'm going to initialize it with null value, and I'm going to create that time variable. And I also need this time string. So I'm going to create a time string also here, which is like an empty string initially. So I've created two different ways. So as I said, this time is responsibility of this digital clock. That's why I've created this time and this time string here. And after every second, I'm going to set that time. Okay. So new date. I'm setting time after every second, and I'm going to change this time string also after every second. So let me remove this. We don't need this const here. So I've refactored my code so that, or I can say I have changed my code so that, my clock should be ticking. So to make your clock tick, right, obviously you need to create that time in some repeated function, in a function which I can call after a particular interval. So you can see, like, I have used set interval, and I'm creating this new date object, and I'm creating that time string again and again, and then I'm saying, okay, render the time string. Now if I save this and if I go back in my application, you don't see the time, right? Nothing is working. Or maybe I'll start with something, some input here, say clock. Okay. And I'm calling, and you can see, like, I'm going to put a console log also here, which is going to give us the time. So I'm going to cut it from here, and let me put it outside here. And let's log the time string for now, only time string. And if I save, see that a time is ticking, I can see the clock, but somehow React is not rendering it again and again. See, the time string is changing. I can see that is getting logged here, but the time string is not getting re-rendered. So this is the limitation of a functional component. Functional component is like a dummy thing. It doesn't understand the properties or the variables which are changing inside this function. So this time string is changing. I am saying, okay, go, React, go ahead and render this time string, but this time string is not rendering. Why? Because functional component doesn't understand the things which are changing inside your component. That's why it is not able to render that. We would thought, right, that it will render the time string, but it is not working. So how we are going to make this clock tick, or how we are going to make this work, right? For that, React has created something called a state system. So state is something different, and React has created a class component for it. So we need to, first of all, we need to convert this functional component into class component. Then only we will be able to use the state system. So if you want to use state, first of all, you need to create a class component or hook, and then probably you can use the state in that. So I think again, we're going to take a quick break here, and we have created our functional component. We tried to make it work using set interval, but it is not working, right? So to make this digital clock work, we are going to convert this digital clock into a class component, and we are going to use that class component and state to make this clock ticking. So let's have a quick break, come back, and we are going to convert this digital clock into a class component, from a functional component to the class component. Hey everyone, welcome back. So we saw the problem with functional component in the previous part of the video, right? We have made this digital clock, but we tried to make it tick using this set interval function, and we tried to create that time string again, and we tried to render it. But somehow, the React is not rendering it because functional components are like a dumb component. They can't put life into your component. To put life or to make your components lively, we need to use something called class component. And how to create class component? So I'll go back to my presentation again, and I'll tell you, like, if you want to create class component, like our digital clock, which is a functional component right now, and we need to convert it into a class component, we need to extend. Now extend is like we need to inherit. If you know the concept of inheritance, if you're good, I mean, you know the basics of programming. So we're going to, which I assume so we need to extend our digital clock from a component class, and the component class is written inside React code, and this component class is then going to provide us with the state system and lifecycle methods. So think like our digital clock is a person. Now digital clock needs some new strength or some new powers, right? The state system and lifecycle method. How can we give that powers, or how can we give that strength to digital clock? By extending that digital clock using the component class. So let's do it. Let's convert our functional component digital clock into a class component. So for that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to rename this file. So I'm going to keep it for your reference. So I'm going to rename it to functional. Okay. Yes. And I'm going to create a new component here, digital clock.js. Again, I'm going to import React from React and React from React. And now to create a class component, as I told you, we need to extend it using component class. So how to get component? So to get component is part of the React code. I'm going to import component also here. So I got the component class now. And to create a class component, we use class keyword. This is a classic programming keyword. If you know object-oriented programming, if you are coming from Java, JavaScript, whatever background, right? So again, then I'm going to give it a name, digital clock. And digital clock is now going to extend from component class, right? And finally, we are going to export our component, export default digital clock. So instead of writing a function, right now I have created a class digital clock, which extend component. And because I'm extending from this component class, now I have those potential, that state system and that lifecycle method thing, right? Now the first thing we need to solve, like how it is going to return the this JSX, right? So obviously we are going to create all these variables, but how we are going to return this JSX? To return that JSX inside a class component, we use something called a render function. So really easy, right? You just need to remember, you need to write a render function, and this render function is going to return that JSX. So I'm going to write that div, and for time being, I'm just going to write digital clock here. Okay. And so you see that I have created a class with the name of digital clock, which extends from a component and which is rendering, or which is returning just a string called digital clock for now. So I'll go back to my index app. Basically, I need to go back to my app, and I'm going to import digital clock from digital clock. Go to save, and if I go back and refresh my application, see that? Now we are not rendering the functional JSX here. I mean the JSX which is returned from a functional component. We are rendering a digital clock which is a class component. And the difference, the comparison, the difference is only this. When we create a functional component, we return JSX directly without writing any function. But when you write a class component, you just need to remember you need to write this render method. And inside that render method, you can return digital clock. Now, I'm going to copy this code from here. So I'm just going to copy and paste it here inside render. And let's see, like, as I said, right, if we convert it into a class component, uh, do we able to see the clock ticking, right? So instead of using this digital clock here, I'm going to use time string. Okay. And I'm going to save it. And if I come back, I can still see the clock. So and you can see the clock is ticking still, that console log, which I have put here. So we have converted a class component into, a functional component into class component. We have set the interval. We have used the render method. We are rendering that time string, but still it is not working. I don't see the clock ticking. So, I mean, what's the use of converting functional component to class component, right? So this class component, this extending by a component class, has given us that potential of using the strength of the state system and the lifecycle method. But to make this clock ticking, to make this time string work, we need to first understand state in React, a state system in React, because this is something which is changing, right? The time which is changing. So our digital clock has some property, I would say, which is a time property, and we know that it is changing. So if something changes, that's a good direction, I would say, to convert it into a state. So that gets converted from props to a state. So maybe this time is initially like a prop for our digital clock, but now it has to be owned by digital clock, so it is going to get converted into a state, right? So I think so the intention of this part of the video is actually to convert a functional component into a class component. We did that. And again, I'm going to take a quick break, short break here, where we will see. And when we will come back, we'll talk about state. We'll understand state system in React and how we can use that state system to make our clock tick. So let's take a quick break, come back, and then we will talk about state in React. Welcome back. So in the last section of this video, we had an issue, right? Like we wanted to render this time string which I'm creating inside this set interval function. And I'm trying to render that time string using this value inside my JavaScript expression. But somehow, this time string is not getting updated, and that's the right thing. I mean, obviously this is not going to render because we need to do something else to make it happen, because we need to tell React that this time string is not just a normal variable. This time string is like a state. So we need to convert this variable into a state. And that's what we are going to discuss in this section of the video. So we are going to jump into the state part now, and we are going to leverage the knowledge of props which we had previously. So if you haven't watched the video about props, I highly recommend you go and watch video about props. So we are going to compare state with props. That will give us a easy way to understand what really state is, because there is a confusion between props and state. People get confused what is prop and what is state, but I'm going to make it simple, and we just need to understand 2-3 points, and you will be able to make a decision around what is prop and what is state for your component. So I'm going to jump back to my notes. So let's have a quick comparison around props versus state. So we already know props are attributes used to configure the component. So think like, props, we use prop to make our component, to build our component at start, at the initial level. So say you want to create any component, obviously you need to build that component with some skeleton, right? some attributes, some properties. Like we have created this user card or this avatar. So obviously this avatar should have the name, the username and the photograph. So that's a configuration, that's an attribute, that's a property we use to make the user avatar. And state, on the other hand, if I compare it with props, is a data which changes over a lifetime of a component. Now, if I come back here, obviously this photograph and this name is probably not going to change. I mean, like now the Instagram application is running and this photo is not going to get updated immediately. That's what I'm saying. This can get updated. This can be a state, but this name, this username, probably I can give you the example. But in theory, I mean, this is some theory where you think like props are attribute which you use to configure the component, and state. If you think inside your component, if some of the value which we use to make our component, and if that value is going to change over a lifetime or a lifespan of a component. So if your application is running and you think that component has some value which going to change, maybe after a second, or maybe after 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 hour, it depends. So that can be a good candidate for state, right? Let's go to the next point where props are input to the component. So we learned about functional component. Functional component is just like a machine which takes the input and which produces JSX as an output. So props are normally just input to the component, but state actually belongs to the component. So props are coming from outside. Like I can give you the example here. If I go back to my code editor, this time string I can pass as a prop, like something like this, as a prop, right? I can pass time to the digital clock as a prop. So prop is something which comes from outside to the component, but state is something which is like owned by the component. It's that component's responsibility. So that will give you a good comparison between props and state. So props are input to the component and state belongs to the component. So first point, props are attributes which used to configure the component. State is data which changes over time. So change should be the one direction. And when you think that some value, some properties which belongs to the component, that could be a good candidate for the state. Now, the next and most important point, props are immutable. And if you don't know what this word immutable or mute is, or mutate is, so props are immutable, you shouldn't change them. So basically, like if I create a variable, like if I go back to my digital clock here, this time string is a variable. Initially, like I'm having a value of clock here, but this value is getting changed over time, right? So this is basically changing a value, mutating a value. So when we pass something as a prop, like I'm passing this time as a prop, and it is going to come, like I'm going to put some value here. And when I'm going to get that value here as a prop, so I'll tell you how we can access that prop. You cannot change it, right? You can actually change it, but you shouldn't change it. That's not a good practice in the React world. And state can be mutable. You can modify state values. So if you think like some of the props which are like coming as input to the component, and if you think that I'm going to change this prop in the future in my component, I think that prop should be converted into state. So very easy. I mean, if you remember these 3 points, props, configuration, if you think some of the value, some of the prop or whatever it is going to change, just make it as a state. Props are input to the component and state belongs to the component. State is owned by the component. So you can ask this question, what my component has, and the answer to that question will be the state for your component. And props, you shouldn't mutate. Actually, props are immutable. You shouldn't change them. And state can be mutable. You can modify state values in your component. Now this is how the comparison you can do between props and state. Let's move on and talk a bit theory about rules of the state. So while defining state or while using state, these are some rules which you're going to follow. So state can only be defined in a class component. Okay, so state cannot belong to functional component. Now there is a star here. So we're going to learn about hooks in this video series. So hooks is actually, like I told you previously, hooks is functional component plus hooks. It means making functional component smart, because I told you functional component are like a dumb component. So if you want to make functional component smart, we use hooks. For now, just keep in mind, you don't know hooks. You don't understand how to make functional components smart. So to make functional component smart, you just remember right now that there's only one way to convert that functional component into class component. And once we learn hooks, once we go to the hooks, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to come back to this and I'm going to explain this at that time. So let's not confuse right now. So state can only be defined in a class component. So you think like your component has something which is going to change over time. You know that is a state candidate. So that's a good time that you need to convert your functional component into a class component. Next point, state is a JavaScript object which contains data related to the component. Obviously, how you're going to create state, and state is not just a value, it's an object, because your component can have multiple state values, right? And you're not going to create different values as state. React needs some way to have state, combine at one place. So they thought of, why not make state as an object? So state is a JavaScript object which is going to contain data related to the component, and it's like a name value pair. That's how you're going to create state. Next point is, when you change state, it re-renders the component almost instantly. And this is really important, right? This is a problem we have in our digital clock. This time string, I'm changing this time string after each second, but this time string is not getting rendered, right? This is not getting re-render. Why? Because the time string variable, this value is not a state. So I need to convert into state. And once I convert that time string into state, that's what it mentioned here. When you change state, it re-renders the component almost instantly. So when we are going to change that time string, React is going to re-render my component, and you're going to see that time actually ticking in the browser. One component can have one state object. I think this is a very good rule, and this is what going to be there, because you're going to create so many components in React. So think like one component can have one state object. State must be initialized when the component is created, and this is important. State must be initialized. I mean, you need to create a state object somewhere, and I'm going to tell you where you need to create that state object. So when your component is going to get created, there is a function called constructor function which is going to get called. And constructor function is the concept of class, actually classes in JavaScript. So we are going to define our state and its initial value inside that constructor function. So state must be initialized when a component is created, and where we are going to initialize our component state is inside a constructor function, and we are going to talk about it. State can only be changed using set state method, because we need a way, right? We need a way to change this time string. Now, how I'm changing this time string here, I'm changing directly, like by assigning equal to sign and then updating that with the latest time. But when the first thing is, we are going to create a state, and how you're going to change that state. To change that state, there is a method called set state, which we are going to use to change our state. And once the state is going to get changed, our component is going to re-render. So I think this is theory around props and state. And before jumping into practical world, I just want to give you a heads up. I would just want to create that context. Even if you're not understanding it, I'm going to explain it again, while practically when we are going to convert that time string into state. So state versus props, a quick recap, right? So state is nothing but the value which changes over time. Props are nothing but configuration for the component. Props are like input to the component. State actually belongs to the component. Props are immutable, so you should change them. State can be mutable, so you can modify state values. And I told you some of the rules of the state, and we are going to go through all of these rules practically. Practically, we are going to do it inside our digital clock component. So I think this is a bit of a theory. Let's have a quick break here, come back, and we are going to use all of these rules inside our digital clock. Welcome back. So let's see how we can initialize and how we can create the first time state for our component. So I'll go back to the rules of the state. So state must be initialized when component is created, right? So this is the first step we are going to take. So let's initialize our state. And to initialize our state, we use something called a constructor function in React. So I'm going to create a new function called constructor. And this constructor function is what we're going to use to initialize our state. And this constructor function by default gets an argument called props. Now you know what is this props, right? These props are nothing but similar to what we had in our functional component. So when we create a functional component, we write something like this, right? This function, digital clock. And what we get props here, something like this. This is similar thing we have here when we are creating a class component, that those props are getting passed to this constructor function. Okay, so the first and the most important step, and this is the step you need to do always, you need to call super props. This is a function super. So basically what we are doing, actually we are calling the constructor function of a component. These are object-oriented programming concept, basically. So what I'm doing, I'm calling the constructor of my digital clock, and as a rule, you need to call the super constructor, means constructor written inside the component class by using the super function and passing the props here. So this is really important. If I'm not going to do it, so let me remove this, and like I can show you what is going to happen. So now if I go back to my application and if I refresh, you see that the application is working, right? But if I remove this super call and if I save and if I go back, you see reference error, must call super constructor in derived class before accessing this. So this is an important step. You need to have that super function to be called. So I'm going to revert it back. So this is important. Just remember super props. Now let's initialize state for the first time in our component. So to create state in our component, we use something called this dot state. Now the name of that variable, the name of that state object is state. So you cannot write my state, okay? Don't think like you're going to write my state. You need to follow the rules of React, because this is the variable name state as a variable name which React uses behind scenes to recreate the state, and that's how React manages the render calls. That's how React going to render your component once again. So this is how you're going to define state, and state should belong to your component, as I said, right? So when we were talking about state versus prop, state belongs to the component, and how we can make something belong to the component by using this keyword. So this means this digital clock, and this digital clock has a state variable. Then we're going to say equal sign, and as I said, if we go back to rules of the state, what state basically is, state is a JavaScript object which contains data related to the component. So it's an object with name value pair. All right, so this is how you're going to define state for each and every component throughout your journey of creating React components. You just need to write this dot state, and it's just an object literal in JavaScript, and what goes inside this object is the name value pairs, and that is nothing but state values of your component. So what's state in our case? In our case, the state is our time string, or I'm going to call it time. So basically my digital clock has time and time is going to tick. So initially I'm going to define my time as new date. Sorry, I don't need to use semicolon there. Time is a new date. So what's going to happen? My digital clock component is going to get created. It's going to initialize this state, and the initial value of that time will be the current time of the machine. See that? So this is how you define your state. You have created a state, time, and now we need to use this state inside our component. So for the time being, I'm just going to do some refactoring around my code. Probably let me have this time there, time string. I'm going to keep it here. First of all, let's see how I can use that state inside my, I'm going to keep this set interval call for some time. I think it is already here in my digital clock function. So let me start from scratch. I'm going to save. So I want to use this state inside my component. So to access my state inside the render function, I just need to call this dot state. Like how we have defined the state, we can access the state in a similar way. And inside my state, what I want to render here, I want to render time. So I'm just rendering time here, but basically we need to convert it into that string, right? So if I go back and if I refresh my application, you'll be able to see, okay, objects are not valid as a React child. So what did I do wrong? This dot state dot time. Why it is not valid? This dot state dot time. This is what, okay. So I think this is new date. That's why it is not showing. So let me convert into toDate string. So this will create a string value actually. See that? So it's showing the current time and time, basically date of my machine. Okay, so now let's go back, and now actually we want to change this time. We need to take it, and basically we don't need to render this kind of thing. We need to render something like this where we are creating, right? We are creating this get hour, get minute, and time dot get second. So let's see how we can achieve this. So I'm going to call the set interval directly after here. So basically I need to change the time, and instead of having this new date, probably I'm going to create that. Basically I need to create a function, and that function is going to return me this time string. So let's write a function. This is a good practice. So probably I'm going to write that function inside my digital clock only. So I'm going to write a function, say get time string, and I'm going to pass it a time object, and that's going to return me all of this. Okay, this time string. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this code from here and I'm going to paste it here. So this is going to return this. So I'm returning. So basically this get time string function is going to take time as an input, and it's going to give me the hours, minute, and second, and it's going to concatenate that together using this template string syntax. So instead of calling this, I'm going to call a get time string function here, and I'm going to pass new date. It's current time. And now if I save and if I go back to my application, see that? It's showing the current time of my machine. But obviously it's not ticking. And to make it tick, we need to write that set interval call. So just after this, I'm going to call that set interval. And inside that set interval, we are going to call a function. And that function is going to get called after each second. And here, now I need to change my state. I need to change my time value, right? And to change the state, if I go back to my notes, to change the state can only be changed using set state method. So now we are going to use the set state method to change the state. And now once the state is going to get changed, As I said, when you change the state, it re-renders the component almost instantly. And that's what we want to do here. We want a time to tick, right? And how can we make it tick? By calling this set state function, which is going to change the state of my application, not application component, and my component is going to get re-rendered. So let's come back and let's change the state using this dot set state method. As I said, you need to use this dot set state method, and we are going to change our state. So basically I need to again change and state, you need to pass again the object here. So basically you're passing the new state object. You're not accessing this time. You're not changing something like this. This is really important. You're not doing this dot state dot time equals to something. Keep in mind, you're never ever you're going to do this. Never ever. Don't do this. Sorry, I need to write don't do this. Never ever. Don't do this. You're not going to change your state directly like this. Whenever you want to change your state, you're going to call this dot set state method. And inside that set state method, what I want to change? I want to change time. So again, time is what it going to be like. It's again going to be a new date, and all those get hour, get minute, and get seconds. So again, I'm going to call my this dot get time string method here, and I'm going to pass it new date object. Pretty simple, because every second, after every second, I need to change my time by calling this dot set state method, which is going to change the time, which is going to return me a new time string. So it's basically taking time as an input, and it's getting the hour, okay, it's getting the minute, it's getting the second, and it's forming that string, that time string, and returning it to me, and I'm going to render that. Now what's happening here, right? My constructor function is going to get called, my state is going to get initialized. After that, so once my state is going to get initialized, it is going to have that initial time. And immediately after that, I'm calling the set interval function. And set interval is a JavaScript function which calls a function, this function, after the time which I have specified here. So I have specified 1 second. This is 1000. This is not 1000 seconds. This is 1000 milliseconds. And if you convert 1000 milliseconds, it's actually equals to 1 second. Okay, got it? So this function is getting called after each second, and it's changing my state. And how to change that state? This dot set state, and I'm updating my time. So now you're going to see that magic, that clock ticking here. If I go back to my application, see that? See the magic of state, see the magic of React, what React is doing here. So finally, I think where we started our journey with a functional digital clock component. We have created this functional digital clock component, and we tried to render this time string, but we were not able to render that, right? Because functional component are like dumb component. They're just for the presentation. So if you want to show something, use functional component. But if you feel like something is going to change in my component, convert it into a state. That's why we have used class component, because state functional components doesn't have state, but class component do have state. That's why I have converted my digital clock into a class component, which extends from a component. And we have created our state, we have changed our state, something like this. So now our clock is ticking. I think I need to do some beautification around my clock. So let's see if I can increase the font size, and if I try to do some CSS part. So let's create one digital clock.css file, and I'm going to import that here. So you can import inside your class component also the CSS part. So dot slash digital clock dot css. So this is my CSS file, and obviously I'm rendering my time here inside a div. So let me give it a class name of, say, clock. And now I'm going to use this clock here And first of all, I'm going to increase the font size. Maybe I'll go with like 200 pixel. Maybe let's try this. Oh, that's too much. Let me try 100 pixel. It's looking better. Maybe I'll go with 80 pixel. And let's have some padding around our clock. So I'm going to put some padding of maybe 10 pixel. And I'm going to give it a border of say 3 pixel solid black color. And let's have some border radius also. So I'm going to use border radius of say 9 pixel. Let me try this value. See that? So this is what we thought of creating, right, when we started this video. And I think you see the result, right? We have created our digital clock. Now we need a zero and all those formatting here. We probably, if I go with a good font also, right? If we have a, maybe I can use Google font to show it. But this is what I want to tell you. Like I want to show you like how we can use state to render our component. Now we know the difference between props and state. We did a comparison. We had a good journey around like how to create class components. So I think practically we have seen how to use state. Practically we know how to use props, and we have this knowledge of props and state. Let's have a quick break again, come back, and I'm going to give you a life cycle, like what happened till now, a life cycle of entire clock component, along with how the application is actually working. So let's have a quick break and we are going to look into it. Let's have a quick summary around it, and yeah, let's come back and have that quick summary. Welcome back. So I actually forgot to tell you this state diagram which I have created basically. So we know like now a state, and we have created this time as a state inside our clock, digital clock component. That's why our clock is ticking. Basically, it's working. So we have a life in our component, right? I just want to quickly give you the idea about like difference between props and state, like how it is working. So if you look at this component, right, so you always think component and props are nothing like some configuration values which you give input to the component, and that's how you're going to render your component in its initial state. And state, so there are two different things here, right? So prop is one thing and state is the other thing, right? Prop, you cannot change prop. Okay, always remember, you're not going to change prop directly. Whenever you want to change something, you're going to use state. So state, these are two different entities. That's why I've shown here props, state. And if you want to change state, you use a set state method, and once the state changes, it automatically re-renders the component. So think like this is a good example, just a real world example I thought of creating. So like you're creating a human being, right? So humans are going to have color, eyes, nose, hand, legs, right? Different parts. So these are props. These are properties. These are attributes which we use to create different human beings, right? But humans has emotions, right? Different human has different emotions, right? So maybe I'm happy, I'm going to smile, and maybe I'm sad, I'm not feeling good, so I'm going to become sad. So that emotion is nothing but a state of that particular human being. So this is a good idea, I can say. So the emotion is a state, and once the emotion changes by using the set state method, and set state in real world is actually those outside people, who changes your emotion. So that's how it is going to re-render that human with different emotions. So this can be a good real world analogy I'm going to tell you, I can tell you. And if we come back to our application, our digital clock. So in our digital clock, so maybe while creating a digital clock, right now I'm showing a 24-hour format. So after 11, it will be 12, and then 13, 14, 15, 16. So that's a 24-hour format I'm showing in my digital clock. But say suppose you want to have a hour format, which is like a 12-hour format. So after 12, it will be again 1, 2, 3, 4, but we need to switch it to AM and PM, right? So obviously that AM/PM, that R format is not a state for your digital clock, it's a prop. So while creating your digital clock, you're going to pass this R format as a prop, and based on that prop, you're going to show the time. Time is a state, And once the time changes using the state set state method, it is going to render or re-render our digital clock. So this is a state diagram which I wanted to show in the previous part of the video, but I forgot. That's okay. Now let's move on and let's have a quick recap around what was happening inside our application till now. Let's have a life cycle, so app life cycle. So what's happening? If I go back to my code editor, so when this application actually runs in the browser, that index.html file gets rendered, right? This is going to get loaded for the first time. Okay, this is our index.html, which you see there in the browser. What you see here actually is a digital clock, but behind the scene, it's rendering that HTML file. That is the first file which is going to get loaded. But after that, what is happening? Our index.js file got ran. Okay, so this index.js file got loaded into the browser and it has executed this code. So it imported React DOM and app, and it has created instance of an app component inside my memory, right? And it has rendered that app component also. So if I go back, you see here instance of app component is created. Then because as my app component instance has been created, inside my app component, we are importing React and digital clock, and we are creating instance of a digital clock component, right? So now my digital clock component instance has been created, and that's how it is happening. You know, one JavaScript file, another JavaScript file, and all those JavaScript files are running behind the scene and they are creating all these objects. So instance of digital clock component is created, then digital clock constructor function gets called, as I told you, right? So when this class component is going to get rendered or going to get created inside the memory of the browser, the first function which is going to get called is called the constructor function. And this constructor function gets this props. That R format I told you in the state diagram, right? I can pass that R format as a prop here, something like this. R format is equals to maybe like, I'm going to say 12 or 24, something like that, just to differentiate, right? So this is that thing, the props. Props are nothing but input, the configuration attributes of our component. Then the super props gets called and our state is going to get initialized, right? So if I come back to my digital clock, state gets initialized. This is the next thing which is happening. Okay, just after that, so the state, this time I'm calling this get time function time string function by passing new date object, and it's returning me this time string. And just after my state has been initialized, we are calling this set interval function gets called, and callback function will wait in the queue. Now this is JavaScript. This is JavaScript. So set interval is a JavaScript function, and this function goes into the queue. There is an event queue in JavaScript, and it's going to wait for its next call. It's not going to get executed immediately. It is going to get executed after 1 second, and there's a star. I mean, I don't want to get into the JavaScript here, but think like it is in the queue. It is waiting. So once the call stack is empty, this function is going to jump into the call stack and this set interval is going to get called. So for now, just remember the set interval is going to get called, and this function which I have defined as a callback after 1000 seconds, after every 1000 seconds is going to wait in the queue. That's what happening here, because this hasn't executed yet. Okay, the state has been initialized, the set interval has been initialized. You think like this, and this function is waiting. Next thing which gets called is my render method. Don't think like set interval is getting called. The things are happening really fast in the browser behind the scene. Okay, you must be thinking, okay, the set interval is getting called. No, your state is initialized, and then your render method is getting called, which is returning me the current state of my application. Okay, so render method gets called, which returns a JSX, and after 1000 milliseconds, after 1 second, so this dot dot dot, so something is going on behind the scene, right, behind my component. Now, as I said, right, this set interval has created this callback. So after 1 second, again my state is going to change. Okay, state has been updated to new values. because now I have changed my time to new time, right? Because of that, now once we change the state, as I told you in the rules of the state, the component is going to re-render immediately. So again, a render method is going to get called. Okay, so again, what's happening? Render method gets called, which returns a new JSX, and this cycle actually repeats because of this set interval function. So I can show you. Let's have a console.log here. Console.log, and let's see how our render is getting called. Enter. And if I go back, see that every second the render is getting called because of that set interval call, because that set interval is actually changing the state of my application. So whenever the state of your component application, whatever component is going to change, your render method is going to get called. I think this is a mouthful. I know we learned a lot, and just go through this part of the video, understand this app lifecycle. This is really important because right now we have only one digital clock component in our application. When you're going to create a bigger application, you're going to have so many components, and all those components are going to follow this sequence. So if you understand the sequence of one component, you're going to understand the sequence of all the components. So this is really important. This life cycle is important. Just have a quick recap of this part of the video, understand it, go for a walk, try to rethink about it, try to recollect whatever I'm trying to say here. So I think we learned a lot. So this is where I'm going to conclude the video. We learned a lot. We learned about class component, we learned about state, we learned about differences between props and state. We created our beautiful digital clock, which is ticking here. I think some styling is definitely needed here, right? We understood we talked about class and hooks, how you can make your functional component like a class component by using hooks. So I'm going to cover a detailed video about hooks in the future, so don't worry about it. We learned about class versus functional component, and some of the questions related to app, class components, state versus props, rules of the state diagram, and finally life cycle. So I think I have covered, I tried to cover a lot of ground around class and state. I think I may be forgetting something because this is all, what these are all dynamic videos, whatever coming into my mind, I'm just trying to tell you. So please forgive me if something is going wrong, because I have these notes only to speak around it, and and everything is dynamic. These videos are not at all scripted. So I'm really sorry if I'm saying something wrong. Maybe I'll go back to my video, and I don't think so I'll be edited, but let's see, I'm going to correct that in the upcoming videos. So with that, I'm going to take a pause here. I think I tried to cover a lot of ground around class and state in this video. Just go through this video once again, maybe practice it, try to create some class component, try to add state into it, and yeah, I'm going to see you in the next video, next day, day 4 of this video, where we are going to cover another topic, another new topic, and that is a really, really important topic called lifecycle methods. So like how I have shown you the lifecycle here, we are going to add some more things into our lifecycle, into our component, into as a lifecycle methods. So that's what I'm going to cover in the next video. I think I I request you to please share this video with your friends and family, like it, subscribe to my channel. That will give me a lot of motivation to create all of these videos. I mean, this requires efforts for sure, but that's okay. So I'm going to see you in the next video. Till then, goodbye, take care, and I'll see you. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.